Well. Last time, guys, we ended up here. I showed you a sneaky little way to achieve detail, to achieve depth without actually having to sculpt. I love that. So today we're actually going to try finish up this temple a little bit more. We gotta combine the pillars. We gotta still finish up this front part. There's some stuff left to do. The temple needs to be placed on something, right? There's plenty of work for us to do. But first, I have to re-import a reference image because, well, I deleted my download folder and there was too much stuff in there. So I'm just gonna add a new reference. Of course, I failed to find the same one as I found last time, so we're working with a different image today. That's always nice. That's why you're changing your reference image midway. So, lesson of today is do not store things in your download folder that you need to keep. Huh? Maybe like a straightforward lesson for some, but it's not for me. Right, so let's continue this, right? And the first things we notice is that we have a color difference, right? This is going to end up as being the same object, the same temple, which means that we need these two objects to have similar colors pretty much, right? So this is the point where we decide which color we're going to follow or if we're going to change both of them. Okay, so I think this one is a little bit too white. I want it to be a little bit more yellow. Most of the reference images are more yellowish, brownish as well, and more like the pillar. So we're just going to tweak the color a little bit, and that's very easy to do. Because, well, what we can do is just open up... actually, let me first enable my screencast keys. I forgot. Here we are. Otherwise, Mr. Big is going to assault me later. I'll swap this down a little bit. There we go. Beautiful. Right, shader editor. Grab that there. So we actually imported the base color into the color of the principal BSDF, right, of the actual diffuse that we made with Materialize last tutorial. And if we deconnect that, then we have a plain white color that only uses a normal map and a displacement map, right? So we only have white, but we can still see details. This is only from the normal map and the displacement map, okay? So let's see if we actually like the details we get from the color or if we don't, because if we do, you can see that we also get the shadow, right? We get the shadow in the background, for example. But if we disconnect this, we also lose, for example, some details in the beard there, right? So this is really just a preference point. And what I'm going to do is actually connect this to the base color. And I'm going to hit Shift-A, search for color and a mixed color and swipe that in between. Reason why is because now we have the easiest way of just trying out what works better, right? We can just swap, go all the way to the right. We have only got the normal map and the displacement. All the way to the left, we have the color. So we can even leave this somewhere in between to just find out the colors that we need, right? And we can even change the white color to more of a brownish color, which means we can already add some of that pillar color into our actual material, right? So let's actually see the color that we want to add, right? And we can even set this on some different values. We can set this to color. It should just color our object as well. If we swipe this all the way to the right, you can see that we keep the shadows of the original texture, but we just color whatever there is to color, right? And usually the darker colors won't really be colored. It's the lighter, the brighter things that will get colored, right? So keep that in mind as well. So now it is, no matter how far I go to the right, we will still keep those shadow parts because we only color, right? So make sure to play around with this. This is not the one, obviously. Just play around with some different values. I'm just going to leave this at mix because I actually like that we get rid of some of these harder shadows on top. Right, I want those shadows to appear from the light, not from the texture. Okay, so we could do a lot of different things right now. I'm just going to try and match the colors. And this is something that you'll do a ton when you're creating scenes, when you're using models from different places, right? Whenever you want to create a bigger scene, a larger scene, right? Remember, this is still part of the volcano landscape scene. we need to already match our props and our attributes, right? Because this has all been in the same environment for ages, for literally ages, right? So this has all been worn down the same way. This is built from the same stone, which means we need to have the same the same textures, right? We need to have the same kind of erosion look. Okay, so we're just gonna try to match that a little bit, and we could go into the pillar and copy and paste all of this stuff. But you know, I'm not gonna do that because I want to control this, and we don't need the wave patterns of the left pillar, right? So we're just gonna add, for starters, a very simple Shift A search a noise texture, right? Noise textures are our friend. We're gonna use it for a lot. So we're just gonna swipe that a bit more to the right, and I'll try to even be a little bit more organized for you guys today, okay? That's new. So what we're gonna do is we want a noise texture to actually influence the color a little bit. So what we're gonna do is hit Shift A, search for a noise, or sorry, for a mixed color. We can finally Shift A and search for that again, right? And then we are gonna swipe that in between, and then our noise texture is actually going to be connected to the vector, right? Noise texture in general is a colored, it's a colored map, right? Some different noise colors. The vector is actually black and white. So we can leave it at color and swipe in a color ramp. That's what I usually do. Shift A, search for a color ramp. Here we go. And with the color ramp, so if you Control Shift click on a node, any node, you will see it into the surface tab of your material output, which means that you can actually see what it looks like. I've already used this before, but I'm not sure if I've actually explained that. So if you Control Shift click on this mix node, for example, we'll be able to see what the color mix is from the input texture and the brown orangish color there. All right, so in a color ramp, we are just going to swipe those values closer so we can actually get some nice contrast going on there. All right. And I actually want to show you some different values. We always left this on linear for now, I believe. But we can actually swap this to a lot of different values. And the ones that I use a lot are ease. It's basically going to make it more eased, right? More smooth. We can even set this to B-spline. B-spline is the smoothest that you're gonna get, okay? So if you ever need a smooth transition from two materials, two colors, then B-spline is often a very, very, very good way to go. Constant is something you use as well a lot for hard, very hard overlaps, right? For example, this very, very hard kind of contrasts between the borders. And, well, if I make this, for example, blue, right? And you will have to follow me for a little bit here. And make this bright blue. And, well, we may need like a whitish somewhere as well. Like a little bit of a brighter patch here. And we could even add another color. Make that white and crank up the vol value there. Right, so you can see that with very easy colors, we can already make some kind of an anime shader for water, for example, right? And if we set this to 4D, and we can now control the W, we can actually swipe this to the sides a little bit, and we can get some animated water, for example, with that hard shader, right? Not sure if you're ever gonna need it, but you know, things like that, anime style things, cartoon things, are often very hard in contrast, in shading overlap. You usually have like a key color, and then you'll have a lighter color, like a highlight, and you'll have one part of the shadow, which is going to be a very hard cut. So you can use a constant color ramp to control, for example, those values. Okay, so now you know. So we should be able to reset this by clicking on the arrow and then reset color ramp. That's always nice, so we don't have to delete it and add a new one in. I'm going to use this for noise, right? So we're just going to leave this as linear. I have the black and the white closer, and we're going to crank up the detail a little bit, just like that. All right, now we can control the scale and see that it is a bit stretched as well, right? So basically what we're going to do is I'm just going to connect. Let's see, we have already got a mapping node here, so let's just use that. Let's just try generate it into the vector. Right. Doing absolutely nothing, I see. Let's try the object. There we go, way better. So now we actually have a better kind of scale. Now the bottom one is something we need to tweak, but for the main and the top here, it works fine. We could even try UV because we did unwrap this, remember, when we did a project from view, right? So that is going to project it from the camera, well, where you are at right now. So we already have a UV map, so we can always try that as well. And that usually works fine as well if we scale this up a little bit, right? So now we can see that our UV map is actually looking the best out of all three options. Right, so we're just gonna stick with that. And now we're gonna add some more detail, some more roughness. And let's crank the blacks a little bit more to the right and the whites a little bit to the right as well. Something like that. Right, so now actually let's hit Ctrl-Shift-Click on our principled BSDF, right, to reconnect that to the surface. And now we can actually set this color ramp to be the vector right there. And you can already see we got some color variation going on, right? And I don't want the second color to be white, but I want it to be more dark. And, well, just something that adds a little bit more of a darker color in there as well. Right, so if you don't really see it, we may just have to play around with this color ramp a little bit. Right, swipe the white value a bit more to the left. And there we go. We already get some nice values back here. It's a little bit too dark in my opinion, but you know, we have that color to tweak. All right, so we can tweak it whenever we feel like it. Something like that. Maybe make it a bit more yellowish as well. Beautiful, right? Now we could use the same color ramp. I've showed this before. We can just swipe that into, let's see, we need a bump map. Okay, I forgot. So we have a normal map. We got that already, but we need an actual bump map, right? I told you this before. If we want a black and white value to control the depth, right? To control a bit of the normal map, we need to connect it to the height input of a bump node, right? So Shift A, bump, drag that in between, connect that black and white value into the height of the bump mode, and here we go. We get crazy results, right? Reason why, obviously, is because it's way too strong. Right, so now, once again, if I crank this down, we're also going to affect a bit, well, maybe not the strength, but if we crank the distance down, we're at some point going to affect our actual input of the normal map, right? So if I disable my displacement map real quick, set that to 0, and set my strength of the normal map, oh my god, to 1, we have a bit of a normal map. Just a tiny bit. The most is coming from our displacement. But, you know, if we set the strength to 0, nothing happens because it is in the color. Okay, never mind that. Right, the thing I'm trying to say, guys, is if we have, for example, this value in the height map, right, and you try to control the strength of only your bump map, right, this one here, then they're both going to be affected, because they're all connected into the bump map, okay? So what we can do instead is, I'm going to Ctrl Z here a few times until we get our bumpy thing back. There we go. So instead, what we can do is control the black and the white values, right? Remember, the input is black and white. So that means that black is the furthest away and white is the furthest towards us, right? The highest bump, pretty much. So if we bring these values closer to each other, right, make the black more light, make the white more dark, we will also get a less strong bump map, right? So obviously I'm not going to use this color ramp because I am already making chaos again. Oh my god, how did this happen? Right, a bit less chaos, I guess. All right, so what we can do is select the color ramp, Ctrl-Shift-D, and we'll have a new one with the same connection. And we're gonna connect this to the height. And now we have this one that we can control for free, right? So make this one a little bit lighter, make the whites a little bit darker. And you can see that we have a way less strong bump map now, right? By just controlling this color ramp. And I'm even going to swipe these sliders a little bit to the side so we have a smoother cut pretty much. And we can even set this to B-spline. I just explained that. It's nice and soft. Right, so we get some bumpiness in here. It has been worn down a little bit over time. Right, some rocks hit it, people throw stuff at it. You know, I don't know what they did back then, but you know, something happened to it. So we just get a little bit of an inconsistency there in the height. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to achieve pretty much. Beautiful. I'm just going to keep it like that. We can always tweak that later. That's the fun part. All right, so you can see the colors still don't match up perfectly. So I'm just going to very quickly tweak this B color, make this a little bit less brown and more towards the whites. And for this one, for the pillar, we can actually try to make this a little bit less purplish, right? There's a purple color in there somewhere. So let's just try to find that. I thought it would be this one. It is not. So we got a lot of noise textures there. And the trick now is to find the correct one, which is a hassle, right? Because I always make my nodes chaotic. And this is why you don't do it, guys. All right, this is the one. We're just going to swipe that a bit more towards the orange part as well, right? Just to match the second one or second object. And there we go. It already matches a little bit better, okay? And we will tweak that in the end a bit more. Now, what I want to focus on is how we're actually going to array these pillars, right? We need a lot more pillars. And I guess by now we all know about arrays, right? About an array modifier that actually copies this stuff to the left or to the right or wherever, and it creates an array, right? A list of multiple objects. So we can do this in two ways, right? We can actually add an array modifier, but we can also add a geometry node system. And this is where you think about what is better, okay? What can you use easier, okay? And well, I'm just going to use an array now. You know I love geometry nodes, so if I'm actually going to use an array modifier, if geometry nodes are available for the same reason, then it must help somehow, okay? And well, the reason why is because there's a very easy thing we can do with an array modifier. And I'll explain that to you guys with a cube, okay? A cube. And we add an array modifier. And we set this to 3. For example, and we swipe this to the left, right? We get 3 of the same thing. Very, very easy. Now, what I want to show is if we add a material and we add a noise texture and we connect that to the color and let's just connect the vector for now, right? We have a noise texture. I'm going to add a color ramp in between, swipe them a bit closer. Don't worry, this is just to show you guys. You don't have to follow this in any way. And what I'm going to do is select the noise, Ctrl-T, and connect the UV map, okay? Because you will have UV maps from time to time, okay? Very occasionally, you will have UV maps because you will texture things. You will need to unwrap your UVs. And when you have UVs unwrapped, like we have for our pillar, right? Remember, we unwrapped those UVs. And when you then array it with a UV coordinate, you're going to get the same noise texture repeated, which means that in the end, you'll end up with a huge array list that all has the same noise texture, and your eyes are very well equipped to spot that, okay? Which means that we're going to not try to get those repetitive patterns. So how do we do that? Well, the easiest way is to connect the object input to the mapping. All right, this is going to already take care of the repetitiveness, as you can see. But from time to time, if your object is going to be more crazy, so to say, or you will not be able to get away with your object inputs because you will, for example, see the seams in your object, right? So the places where the UVs are unwrapped, you will have some seams in there, and then they will have a weird overlap. You'll be able to see that their texture doesn't line up there, right? So in that case, you want to use UVs. But we don't want the repetitive patterns. So guys, what do we do? Well, there's a nice option of UVs in the array section that can actually, let me crank this up a little bit, that can actually give us some repetitiveness back, right? We have an offset of the U and of the V, which means, well, pretty much X and Y, I guess. So we can just crank the values up, and it's going to offset our UV of each of the copied arrays, right? Of each of the copied objects. And we can just crank that in the Y direction and the X direction. And now you can see that we actually have a different noise texture on every cube, even though we're using the UV system, right? Isn't that beautiful? So now when we use UVs, we actually see that our noise texture is connected on each side of the cubes, pretty much. At least, as best as we can get, right? So that is beautiful, and that is something that, well, you just need to know. All right, so now that we know that, we can go back to the pillars, right? So if we array this, to, let's say, -1. -1, you have to know that. It's going to just connect them right at the center, right at the edge. Because we have our origin at the center of the pillar, it is going to exactly offset our pillar by 1, which means they're going to connect exactly at the edges. Right, if we set this to more than -1, we're actually going to increase that area, that distance a little bit, right? So the X, I want to set it to 0. And the Y, well, let's see. They're pretty close together, actually. So let's give it a little bit more space, because at some point we also need to add those stone slabs on the top there. So something like this works fine. So now we actually have some repetitiveness here. And, well, we can just find our noise textures, right? The noise textures are the ones that actually give us the repetitive pattern. So what we can do is just find the setting of the noise textures, right? We have a noise texture here. It's connected to the mapping, and that's the fun part about nodes. You can just follow where it goes, right? This one's connected to the UVs, right? And I told you guys this. If it's connected to the UVs, you will have some kind of a repetitive pattern. Unless we go to the UVs and swipe this up a little bit. All right. Oh, and also swipes up the mapping, of course, because, well, it is going to affect all the UVs, which means also the ones of the vertical stripes, right? So if we offset this, make sure that you offset this exactly at the same the same line, for example. So if we swipe this down a little bit, make sure that they just connect there at the middle. Okay? So something like this works fine. We have an offset of 0.8 while we still have the same vertical alignment. Okay? And we can even try that with the second one, which you will see, it will even rotate our pillar around a little bit. Okay? So you can see if we crank this up and down, it is actually going to rotate our wave section a little bit, right? Which is actually fun, because that means that even the wave texture is going to be a little bit with an offset. That is beautiful. Beautiful. So everything will be slightly different with each pillar, which is nice. All right, so now we can just crank this up to, well, I don't know, how many are there? I'm not going to count. I'm going to estimate 14. Okay, just, finger in the air and guess. So let's set this to like 14. Beautiful. Seems about right, I guess. So the only thing that is now repetitive is pretty much that dark line. And that is because, well, we have got the separation lines of the stones. This is where they are connected, which means that there is supposed to be a darker area there. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it like this. It may be a little bit dark though, so we can always go out and tweak that a little bit. Is it this color? Nope. Where is it? Maybe it's this one. There we go. So let's make that a little bit darker, but not as dark as it was. Something like this, right? Beautiful. So now we have a nice array pattern of stone. Beautiful. Right, so if we want to array this again, right? I mean, there are gonna be two rows, right? Left and the right side. We can either duplicate this, Shift D, or we can just add another array modifier, right? As long as we can keep this all procedural, we're going to keep it procedural, right? So I'm gonna array this. And now we want the Y direction, but I want, the X direction, but I want the negative one. And then we can just crank up this X direction, right? So how wide do we want this building to be? I'm guessing it is, I can actually count this now, right? 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pillars white. So I'm just going to guess the distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, fine. All right, we can tweak this. We can tweak this later if we want.